On the evening of August 24th, 2005, Linda Turner made spaghetti for dinner. It was Thursday, and Thursday was always spaghetti night in the Turner household in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She set 3 plates on the table, one for herself, one for her husband Robert, and one for their youngest daughter Emily, who was due home from her shift at the coffee shop any minute now. Linda stirred the sauce and glanced at the clock. 9:15. Emily's shift ended at 9. The drive from downtown took about 20 minutes, maybe 25 if she stopped for gas. Linda was not worried yet. Emily was 20 years old, a sophomore at the University of South Dakota, responsible and predictable. She always called if she was running late. At 9:20, the phone rang. Linda wiped her hands on her apron and picked up. It was Emily. Her voice was bright and clear, the voice of a young woman who had just finished a long shift and was looking forward to her mother's cooking. "I am heading home now, Mom. I will be there in about 30 minutes, Linda smiled. "Drive safe, sweetheart. Dinner is almost ready." That was the last time Linda Turner heard her daughter's voice. Robert Turner sat in his armchair in the living room, reading the evening paper. He was a man of routine, a high school teacher who valued order and predictability. At 9:45, he looked up and asked his wife if Emily had called. She said yes, she would be home soon. Robert nodded and went back to his paper. By 10:15, Linda was pacing in the kitchen. The spaghetti was getting cold. She tried Emily's cell phone. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. A knot formed in her stomach, the kind of knot that mothers feel when something is not right. "Robert," she said, her voice tight. "Emily is not answering her phone." Robert put down his paper. "Maybe she stopped somewhere," he said. "You know how she is, always helping someone," but Linda knew her daughter. Emily always answered her mother's calls. Always. She tried the phone again. Nothing. At 10:30, Robert stood up and reached for his car keys. "I'm going to drive her usual route," he said. Maybe she had car trouble. Linda wanted to go with him, but she stayed by the phone in case Emily called. She stood in the kitchen, staring at the 3 plates of cold spaghetti, and prayed. Robert drove slowly along Interstate 90, the main route from downtown Sioux Falls to their neighborhood. The highway was quiet at this hour, just a few scattered headlights in the distance. He scanned the shoulder, looking for Emily's silver Toyota Corolla, the car they had helped her buy earlier that year. At 10:42, he saw it. The Corolla was parked on the shoulder, about 15 miles from home. The headlights were still on, cutting through the darkness. The driver's side door was open just slightly, as if someone had gotten out in a hurry. Robert pulled over and got out of his car. His heart was pounding. He walked to the Corolla and looked inside. The keys were in the ignition. Emily's wallet sat on the passenger seat, untouched. Her cell phone was there too. In the cup holder was a bottle of water, still cold. But Emily was not there. Robert stood on the side of the highway, the wind from the Big Sioux River blowing across the empty fields, and felt the world tilt beneath his feet. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. His voice when he spoke was steady, but his hands were shaking. "My daughter is missing," he said. "Her car is here, but she is gone." Within 20 minutes, the highway was filled with flashing lights. Police cars, fire trucks, and ambulance. Officers cordoned off the area with yellow tape and began photographing the scene. Linda arrived shortly after, driven by a neighbor because she was too distraught to drive herself. When she saw Emily's car, she let out a sound that Robert would never forget. It was not a scream. It was something deeper, something that came from a place no parent should ever have to visit. She ran to the Corolla, but an officer stopped her. "Ma'am, this is a crime scene. You cannot touch anything." "Crime scene?" Linda's voice was sharp. "What crime? Where is my daughter?" The officer did not have an answer. Linda stood behind the yellow tape, staring at the open car door, and felt her legs give out. She sank to the pavement, and Robert knelt beside her, holding her as she wept. That night, the Sioux Falls Police Department launched a massive search. Officers walked the highway with flashlights, calling Emily's name into the darkness. Helicopters equipped with infrared cameras flew over the Big Sioux River and the surrounding fields. Search dogs were brought in, their handlers giving them pieces of Emily's clothing to track her scent. The dogs picked up a trail. They ran from the Corolla toward the riverbank, their noses to the ground, tails rigid with focus. Linda and Robert followed behind the officers, hope rising in their chests. Maybe Emily had wandered off, disoriented. Maybe she had fallen and hit her head. Maybe she was lying somewhere nearby, waiting for help. But at the river's edge, the dogs stopped. They circled, barked, and then sat down. The trail had gone cold. Officers searched the riverbank with floodlights, looking for any sign of Emily. Divers were called in to search the water. They worked through the night, but found nothing. By morning, the search expanded. Hundreds of volunteers from the Sioux Falls community joined the effort, walking through cornfields and along rural roads, their eyes scanning the ground for any clue. The local news covered the story, showing Emily's photograph on every channel. She was a pretty young woman with a bright smile, the kind of smile that made people want to help. But as the hours turned into days, that smile became a haunting reminder of what was missing. Linda and Robert barely slept. They stayed at the search site, drinking coffee from thermoses, their eyes red and swollen. Linda kept her phone in her hand at all times, checking it every few minutes in case Emily called. She could not accept that her daughter was gone. Not Emily, not her baby. On the third day, a police officer sat down with Linda and Robert and gently suggested that they go home and rest. "We will keep searching," he promised, "but you need to take care of yourselves." Robert nodded, but Linda shook her head. "I am not leaving," she said. "Not until we find her." The officer looked at her with sympathy. "Mrs. Turner," he said quietly, "we have searched everywhere. If Emily is out here, we will find her. But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this may take time." Linda stared at him. "What are you saying?" The officer hesitated. "Sometimes, in cases like this, people leave on their own. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she will come back when she's ready." Linda's eyes flashed. "My daughter did not leave. Someone took her." The officer did not argue, but his expression said he was not convinced. That conversation planted a seed of frustration that would grow over the coming months and years. Linda and Robert realized that the police were not treating Emily's disappearance as a crime. They were treating it as a missing persons case, and the distinction mattered. It meant fewer resources, less urgency, and a growing sense that their daughter's life did not matter as much as it should. Emily Marie Turner was born on March 15th, 1985 in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She was the youngest of two daughters, and from the moment she arrived, she filled the Turner home with light. As a child, Emily was curious and gentle. She loved animals, especially the stray cats that wandered into their backyard. She would leave bowls of milk on the porch and spend hours sitting quietly, waiting for the cats to trust her enough to come close. Linda used to joke that Emily had the patience of a saint. In high school, Emily was known as the girl who always had time for others. She volunteered at the local food bank, tutored younger students, and never said no when someone needed help. Her teachers described her as compassionate and thoughtful, the kind of student who made teaching worthwhile. After graduating, Emily enrolled at the University of South Dakota, majoring in sociology. She wanted to work with disadvantaged communities, to help people who had been forgotten by the system. It was just like her, Linda thought, to choose a path that required giving more than taking. To help pay for school, Emily worked part-time at a small coffee shop downtown. Her co-workers adored her. She was always on time, always cheerful, always willing to cover someone's shift if they needed it. She had a way of making customers feel seen, remembered their names and their usual orders, asked about their families. One of her co-workers later told police that Emily had mentioned feeling watched a few weeks before she disappeared. She said a car had followed her home one night, driving slowly behind her until she turned into a different street. Emily had laughed it off, saying she was probably just being paranoid, but her co-worker remembered the unease in her voice. Emily lived at home with her parents, partly to save money, partly because she liked being close to her family. She and her mother were especially close. They talked every day, shared recipes, watched movies together on weekends. Linda knew her daughter's habits, her routines, her moods. She knew that Emily always answered the phone when she called. She knew that Emily would never leave without saying goodbye. That is why, when the police suggested Emily might have run away, Linda felt a fury she had never known. They did not know her daughter. They did not know the girl who left bowls of milk for stray cats, who worked extra shifts to help pay for textbooks, who called her mother every single day without fail. Emily had not run away. Someone had taken her, and Linda would spend the rest of her life proving it. The forensic team that examined Emily's car found several pieces of evidence, but in 2005, their significance was not fully understood. Behind the Corolla, in the soft dirt of the highway shoulder, were tire tracks from another vehicle. The tread pattern suggested a mid-sized pickup truck. The tracks were deep, indicating the vehicle had been parked there for some time, not just passing by. A few feet away, there was a shoe print, size 11, belonging to a man. The print pointed toward the Corolla, but there were no return tracks, as if the person had walked to the car and then vanished. Inside the Corolla, everything appeared normal. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no indication of violence. Emily's wallet contained $43 in cash, untouched. Her phone showed no unusual calls or messages. The water bottle she had purchased at the gas station was still in the cup holder, condensation beading on the plastic. The forensic team photographed everything, collected soil samples, measured the tire tracks and shoe print. But then they made a critical mistake. In their report, they wrote, "No clear evidence of a crime. Victim may have left the vehicle voluntarily." That single sentence would haunt the case for the next 15 years. Because of that conclusion, the investigation was not treated with the urgency it deserved. The tire tracks were documented but not analyzed in depth. The shoe print was photographed, but not cast in plaster, making it nearly impossible to identify the brand or specific model later. Some of the secondary tire tracks were accidentally overwritten by police vehicles at the scene, destroying potential evidence. Most critically, Emily's cell phone records showed that her phone had pinged off a tower near the Big Sioux River shortly after her last call to her mother. This meant the phone had been active in that area, which could have helped narrow the search zone. But the police did not follow up on this lead. They assumed the phone had been thrown into the river and was unrecoverable. Linda and Robert learned about these mistakes later, and the knowledge was almost unbearable. If the police had acted differently that first night, if they had treated the scene as a crime rather than a missing persons case, would Emily still be alive? Would they have found her in time? These questions would torment them for years. In the weeks following Emily's disappearance, the Sioux Falls community rallied. Volunteers posted flyers with Emily's photograph on every telephone pole, in every shop window, at every gas station. The local news ran segments asking for information. A tip line was set up and calls poured in, but most of the tips led nowhere. Someone claimed to have seen Emily at a bus station in Minneapolis. Police investigated and found it was a case of mistaken identity. Another caller said Emily was living in a commune in Montana. That too turned out to be false. One particularly cruel tip claimed Emily had been seen working at a casino in Nevada, living under a new name. Robert drove all the way to Nevada to check. It was not her. Each false lead was a fresh wound. Linda would hear the phone ring and feel her heart leap, only to have it shattered again when the tip fell apart. By the end of 2006, the active search had stopped. Police assured the Turners they were still investigating, but there were no new leads, no new evidence. The case was going cold. Linda refused to accept it. She wrote letters to the governor, to the FBI, to anyone who might listen. She appeared on local news programs, pleading for information. She kept Emily's room exactly as it had been. The bed made, the textbooks stacked on the desk, as if her daughter might walk through the door at any moment. Robert tried to be strong for his wife, but the weight of grief was crushing him. He stopped reading the paper, stopped watching the news. He spent hours in the backyard, building things. A birdhouse, a bench, a wooden cross, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from breaking. Their older daughter, Sarah, tried to hold the family together, but she was grieving too. She had lost her sister, and now she was watching her parents slowly disintegrate. In 2009, the Sioux Falls Police Department officially classified Emily's case as cold. The decision was made in a closed meeting, and the Turners were informed by a brief, impersonal letter. Linda read the letter once, then crumpled it in her fist. "Cold case," she said bitterly, "as if my daughter is just a file in a cabinet." Robert said nothing. He walked out to the backyard and sat on the bench he had built, staring toward the highway where Emily's car had been found. He stayed there until dark. That night, Linda wrote in her journal, something she had started doing after Emily disappeared. The entry read, "They have given up, but I will not. Emily deserves more than this. She deserves justice, and I will fight for her until the day I die." The years between 2009 and 2020 were the darkest of Linda and Robert Turner's lives. They went through the motions of living. Robert returned to teaching, though his heart was not in it. Linda volunteered at the food bank, the same one where Emily had worked as a teenager. She found some comfort in doing the kind of work her daughter had loved. But the pain never left. It was always there, a heavy stone in their chests, making it hard to breathe. Every year on August 24th, they held a vigil at the spot where Emily's car had been found. At first, dozens of people came, holding candles and singing hymns. But as the years passed, the crowds grew smaller. People moved on. Life continued. Only the Turners could not move forward. Linda kept Emily's case alive in any way she could. She maintained a Facebook page dedicated to finding her daughter, posting updates and old photographs. She contacted true crime podcasters and bloggers, hoping someone with a fresh perspective might see something the police had missed. She even hired a private investigator, though they could not afford it. The investigator worked for 6 months and found nothing new. Robert tried to be supportive, but sometimes the wait was too much. There were nights when he sat alone in the garage, staring at Emily's bicycle, and wept. He blamed himself. If he had driven her home from work that night, she would still be alive. If he had insisted she not work late shifts, she would still be alive. If, the word haunted him. In 2012, a glimmer of hope appeared. The Sioux Falls Police Department formed a cold case unit, and Emily's file was one of the first to be reviewed. A new team of investigators went through the old evidence, looking for anything that might have been missed. They found something. The truck driver who had reported seeing a green pickup near Emily's car had mentioned part of a license plate in his original statement. The detail had been recorded but never followed up on. The new team requested vehicle registration records for green pickup trucks in South Dakota from 2005. The list was over 1,000 vehicles long. It took months to cross-reference registrations, addresses, and ownership histories. Most led nowhere. Vehicles had been sold, owners had moved, records were incomplete. Linda and Robert allowed themselves to hope. Maybe this time, they thought. Maybe this is the breakthrough. But after 2 years of painstaking work, the cold case team came up empty. The license plate detail was too vague, the records too fragmented. In 2015, they closed the review with a brief report. All efforts to trace vehicles yielded no results. The opportunity was lost due to documentation errors. When Linda read that report, she felt something inside her break. She had held on for so long, believing that someday someone would find the truth. But now it seemed the truth was buried too deep, lost to time and bureaucratic failure. She told Robert she did not know if she could keep going. Robert held her hand and said, "We owe it to Emily. We cannot give up on her." So they did not give up. But hope, once so bright, had dimmed to the faintest flicker. On March 8, 2020, a farmer named Carl Jensen was clearing land along the Big Sioux River in Lincoln County. He was preparing to expand his grazing fields, using a plow to turn the thick, overgrown soil. As the plow cut through the earth, something white caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a piece of wood or an old animal bone, but when he stopped to examine it, his blood ran cold. It was a human skull. Carl backed away from the plow and immediately called the police. Within an hour, the area was cordoned off, and forensic teams were on site. Over the next several days, investigators carefully excavated the area. They found more bones, scattered but mostly intact. Nearby, they discovered the remains of a jacket, rotted and barely recognizable. And in the pocket of that jacket was something that stopped everyone in their tracks. A silver necklace, with a small pendant in the shape of the letter E. Linda Turner had given Emily that necklace on her 18th birthday. Emily had worn it every day since. The remains were sent to the South Dakota State Forensic Lab for analysis. DNA samples were compared to blood samples that Linda had provided during the original investigation. On March 23, 2020, the lab confirmed what everyone already suspected. The remains belonged to Emily Marie Turner. Linda received the call from the police while she was folding laundry. The detective's voice was gentle, but the words hit her like a physical blow. "Mrs. Turner, we have confirmed the identity of the remains found near the Big Sioux River. It is Emily. I am so sorry." Linda sat down on the floor of the laundry room, the phone still pressed to her ear, and felt 15 years of unanswered questions collapse into a single, unbearable truth. Her daughter was dead. She had been dead this whole time. When Robert came home, he found Linda sitting on the floor, surrounded by unfolded laundry, staring at nothing. He did not need to ask. He knew. He sat down beside her and took her hand. They stayed there for a long time, not speaking, just holding on to each other in the wreckage of their grief. The news that Emily's remains had been found spread quickly through Sioux Falls. The case, which had faded from public memory, was suddenly front-page news again. But this time, it was not a missing persons case. It was a homicide investigation. Forensic pathologists examined Emily's bones and found evidence of violence. Her ribs were fractured. Her jaw showed signs of blunt force trauma. Her left forearm had a defensive fracture, the kind of injury that occurs when someone raises their arm to protect themselves from a blow. Emily had fought for her life, and she had lost. The location of the remains was significant. It was less than 5 miles from where her car had been found, and it fell within the area where her cell phone had last pinged in 2005. the very area the police had failed to search thoroughly. Linda learned this detail and felt a rage so intense it frightened her. If they had searched properly, she thought, we might have found her. We might have brought her home years ago. But anger, she realized, would not bring Emily back. What she needed now was justice. With Emily's case now classified as a homicide, the investigation took on new urgency. The forensic team working the burial site found something else. A small piece of dark denim fabric partially buried near Emily's remains. The fabric did not match Emily's jacket. It appeared to be from a pair of men's jeans. The fabric was sent to the lab for DNA analysis. When the results came back, they found male DNA that did not match anyone in the National CODIS database. This meant the person who had killed Emily had no prior arrests or DNA on file. It was a setback, but it was also a clue. The killer's DNA was now in their hands. They just needed to find him. In October 2020, the Sioux Falls Police Department made a decision that would change everything. They sent the DNA sample to a private forensic genealogy lab in Virginia. Forensic genealogy was a relatively new field, but it had already proven its power in solving decades-old cold cases. The process involved comparing crime scene DNA to profiles in commercial genealogy databases, then building family trees to identify potential suspects. It was expensive and time-consuming, but the Turners were willing to do whatever it took. They worked with a local nonprofit to raise funds, and the community of Sioux Falls responded. Within weeks, they had raised enough money to cover the cost. The lab began its work. Analysts compared the DNA from the denim fabric to millions of profiles in genealogy databases. They were looking for distant relatives, people who shared enough genetic markers to indicate a family connection. After months of painstaking work, they found a match. The DNA pointed to a family named Price, with roots in Sioux Falls. The Price family was large, spanning several generations. The forensic genealogists built a detailed family tree, tracing lineages through birth certificates, marriage records, and death certificates. Slowly, they narrowed the pool of potential suspects. By early 2021, they had a name: Daniel Price. Daniel Price was 43 years old in 2021. He had lived in Sioux Falls his entire life. And in 2005, he had been 28. He had a history of violence. In 2002, he had been arrested for assaulting his ex-wife, though the charges were later dropped. Between 2004 and 2007, neighbors had reported him for stalking behavior, though no charges were ever filed. Most significantly, vehicle registration records showed that in 2005, Daniel Price had owned a green Ford F-150 pickup truck. The cold case team now had a suspect, but they needed proof. In February 2021, Sioux Falls police placed Daniel Price under 24/7 surveillance. Unmarked cars followed him to work, to the grocery store, to the bar he frequented on Friday nights. Detectives documented his every move, waiting for the right moment. They needed to collect his DNA without alerting him. If he knew he was a suspect, he might destroy evidence or flee. On a Friday night in late February, Daniel went to a bar in suburban Sioux Falls. Detectives watched as he drank several beers, then left the bar and tossed an empty can into a trash bin outside. As soon as Daniel drove away, a detective retrieved the can. It was sealed in an evidence bag and sent directly to the lab. A few days later, Daniel was seen smoking outside a supermarket. When he left, detectives collected the cigarette butts he had discarded. The lab worked quickly. On March 5, 2021, the results came back. The DNA from Daniel Price's beer can and cigarette butts was a perfect match to the DNA found on the denim fabric at Emily's burial site. Linda and Robert were in the kitchen when the detective called with the news. Linda answered the phone, and when she heard the words, "We have a match," her knees buckled. Robert caught her and helped her into a chair. After 15 years, they finally had a name. The man who had killed their daughter was Daniel Price, and he had been living in Sioux Falls the entire time. On July 12, 2021, at 6 in the morning, a team of police officers surrounded Daniel Price's home in Harrisburg, a small town just outside Sioux Falls. They knocked on the door and announced themselves. "Daniel Price, you are under arrest." Daniel answered the door in a wrinkled t-shirt, looking disoriented. He was handcuffed and led to a police car as his neighbors watched from their windows. At the police station, Daniel was placed in an interrogation room. Two detectives sat across from him and asked if he knew Emily Hartman. "No," Daniel said. "I do not know her." The detectives showed him a photograph of Emily. He glanced at it and shook his head. They asked if he had ever been to the area where Emily's car was found. "Maybe," Daniel said. I drive that highway sometimes. The detectives asked if he remembered the night of August 24th, 2005. Daniel shrugged. That was 16 years ago. How would I remember? The detectives placed a file on the table and opened it. Inside were photographs of the crime scene, the denim fabric, and the lab report showing the DNA match. "We have your DNA," one detective said. "It was found with Emily Hartman's remains. Can you explain that?" Daniel's face went pale. He leaned back in his chair and said nothing. Over the next several hours, his story changed multiple times. First, he claimed he had never met Emily. Then he said he might have given her a ride once. Then he said he did not remember, but the evidence did not lie. The DNA was a perfect match. The odds of it belonging to someone other than Daniel Price were 1 in a billion. On March 15th, 2022, exactly 17 years after Emily's 20th birthday, Daniel Price went on trial for first-degree murder. The courtroom was packed. Linda and Robert sat in the front row holding hands. Behind them were Emily's friends, her co-workers, and dozens of people from the Sioux Falls community who had followed the case for years. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They presented the DNA evidence, the forensic genealogy analysis, the tire tracks and shoe prints from the original crime scene. They called witnesses who testified to Daniel's history of violence and stalking behavior. They played recordings of his interrogation, where his story changed multiple times. The defense argued that the DNA evidence could have been contaminated, that 16 years in wet soil could have corrupted the sample. But the prosecution brought in forensic experts who explained, in painstaking detail, how the evidence had been collected and preserved. The DNA was intact. The match was absolute. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. On the charge of first-degree murder of Emily Marie Turner, we find the defendant, Daniel Price, guilty. Linda collapsed into Robert's arms, sobbing. Around them, people wept and embraced. It was not joy. It was relief. After 16 years, there was finally an answer. The judge sentenced Daniel Price to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led out of the courtroom, Daniel looked back at the Turners. Linda met his eyes and did not look away. She wanted him to see her, to know that Emily's family had never given up, would never forget. Outside the courthouse, Linda and Robert spoke to reporters. Robert's voice was steady but thick with emotion. "We have waited 16 years for this day," he said. "Emily deserved justice. Today she finally received it," Linda added, her voice breaking. "My daughter is gone. Nothing will bring her back, but at least now we can lay her to rest knowing the truth." In the days following the trial, more details about Daniel Price emerged. Reporters discovered that in 2005, he had volunteered in the search for Emily. He had walked the riverbanks with other volunteers, had stood in the crowd at vigils, had even spoken to Linda and Robert, offering his condolences. The realization was sickening. The man who had killed their daughter had looked them in the eye and pretended to care. Linda remembered him now. A man in a green jacket, quiet and unremarkable. She had shaken his hand and thanked him for helping search for Emily. The memory made her physically ill, but she refused to let it destroy her. Daniel Price had taken Emily's life. He had stolen 16 years from their family, but he would not take anything more. In May 2022, the Turner family held a funeral for Emily. Her remains were buried in a quiet cemetery in Sioux Falls, beneath a tree that bloomed white flowers every spring. The headstone read, Emily Marie Turner, March 15, 1985, August 24, 2005. Beloved daughter, sister, and friend. Forever in our hearts. Hundreds of people attended the service. Friends from high school, co-workers from the coffee shop, professors from the university, and strangers who had followed Emily's story and felt compelled to pay their respects. Linda stood at the graveside, holding a bouquet of white roses, Emily's favorite. She placed the flowers on the casket and whispered, "You can rest now, sweetheart. We found him. You are home." Robert stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. For the first time in 16 years, he felt something that resembled peace. It was not happiness. It would never be happiness, but it was the quiet knowledge that they had kept their promise. They had not given up. They had fought for Emily until the very end. After the funeral, the Sioux Falls community came together to honor Emily's memory. A group of her friends and former classmates established the Emily Hartman Scholarship Fund at the University of South Dakota. The scholarship was awarded annually to a female student studying sociology or social work, the fields Emily had been passionate about. In the first year, The fund raised over $200,000. It was a testament to how many lives Emily had touched, even in her short time on Earth. Linda became involved with the scholarship committee. She met with the recipients each year, young women who reminded her so much of Emily. She told them about her daughter, about her kindness and her dreams. She wanted Emily's legacy to be more than a tragedy. She wanted it to be a force for good. Robert, who had always been a private man, began speaking at events for families of missing persons. He shared his story, the mistakes that had been made in Emily's case, the importance of never giving up. His words gave hope to others who were walking the same dark path he and Linda had walked. The Big Sioux River, where Emily's remains had been found, became a place of remembrance. The community built a small memorial there, a stone bench with a plaque that read, "In memory of Emily Turner and all those lost too soon. May we never forget." People left flowers and candles at the memorial. On the anniversary of Emily's disappearance, vigils were held there, and Linda and Robert always attended. They stood by the river, listening to the water, and felt close to their daughter. The Emily Hartman case became a turning point for cold case investigations in South Dakota. The success of forensic genealogy in identifying Daniel Price led to renewed interest in other unsolved cases. Police departments across the state began partnering with genealogy labs, and several long-dormant cases were reopened. For Linda and Robert, this was bittersweet. They were glad that Emily's case had led to progress, that other families might find the answers they desperately needed. But it also reminded them of how much time had been lost, how many mistakes had been made. In an interview 2 years after Daniel's conviction, Linda was asked if she had forgiven the police for their early failures. She thought for a long moment before answering. "I understand that they did the best they could with what they knew at the time," she said. "But I will never forget that those mistakes cost us years of not knowing. Emily deserved better. Every victim deserves better." She paused, then added, "What I hope people take from this is that no case is ever truly cold. As long as someone sees us continue ours, as long as someone is willing to fight, there is hope. Science evolves. Technology improves. The truth does not disappear. It waits." Robert nodded beside her. "We waited 16 years, he said. 16 years of not knowing if our daughter ran away, if she was hurt, if she was alive somewhere thinking we had abandoned her. That not knowing was its own kind of torture. But we never stopped believing that someday we would find the truth." The interviewer asked what they would say to other families living through similar situations. Linda's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "Do not give up," she said. "I know how hard it is. I know there are days when you cannot get out of bed, when the weight of not knowing crushes you. But you have to keep fighting. Write letters. Make phone calls. Talk to the media. Do not let your loved one become just another file in a drawer. Keep their name alive. Keep their story alive," Robert added. "And do not be afraid to push for new technology, new methods. The DNA that caught Emily's killer existed in 2005, but the technology to use it did not. If we had given up in 2009 when the case went cold, Emily would still be an unsolved mystery. But we kept pushing, and when the technology caught up, we were ready." The interview ended with Linda holding up a photograph of Emily, taken just weeks before she disappeared. In the photo, Emily was smiling, her eyes bright, the silver E necklace visible around her neck. "This is how I want people to remember her," Linda said. "Not as a victim, not as a case number, but as a young woman with dreams and a future. Daniel Price took her life, but he cannot take her memory. That belongs to us, and to everyone who loved her." In the years since Daniel Price's conviction, the Turners have lived quietly. They still live in the same house in Sioux Falls, the house where Emily grew up. Her room is no longer a shrine frozen in time. Linda finally packed up Emily's belongings, donating her textbooks to the university library and her clothes to charity. But she kept the small things, the photographs, the journals, the little notes Emily used to leave on the refrigerator. Robert retired from teaching in 2023. He spends his time woodworking, building furniture that he donates to families in need. It is his way of honoring Emily, of doing the kind of work she would have done. Linda volunteers at a support group for families of homicide victims. She sits with mothers who have just learned their children are dead, with fathers who do not know how to keep living. She does not offer false hope or empty platitudes. She simply listens, and then she tells them, "You will survive this, not because you want to, but because you have to. And someday, you will find a way to turn your pain into something that matters." The Turner family has grown smaller, but closer. Sarah, Emily's older sister, visits often with her 2 young daughters. The girls never met their Aunt Emily, but they know her story. Linda has made sure of that. She tells them about the young woman who loved animals and helped others, who worked hard and dreamed big. She wants Emily to be real to them, not just a sad story from the past. On Emily's birthday each year, the family gathers at her grave. They bring flowers and balloons and they talk to her. Linda tells Emily about the scholarship recipients, about the young women who are living out the dreams Emily never got to fulfill. Robert tells her about the furniture he has built, the families he has helped. Sarah brings drawings from her daughters, pictures of rainbows and flowers that they leave at the headstone. It is their way of keeping Emily present, of refusing to let death have the final word. The Emily Hartman case has been covered extensively in the media. True crime podcasts have devoted episodes to it. Documentaries have been made. Books have been written. Linda and Robert have participated in some of these projects, carefully choosing which ones to support. They are selective because they want Emily's story told with dignity and respect. They do not want her reduced to sensational headlines or gruesome details. They want people to understand what was lost, not just how it was lost. One documentary, released in 2024, focused on the role of forensic genealogy in solving cold cases. It featured interviews with the scientists who worked on Emily's case, explaining how they built the family tree that led to Daniel Price. The documentary was watched by millions of people and led to increased funding for cold case units across the country. Linda and Robert were invited to speak at a conference on forensic science. Standing before an audience of detectives, scientists, and legal professionals, Linda said, "Emily's case shows what is possible when we refuse to give up, when we embrace new technology, and when we remember that behind every case is a family that needs answers." She paused, looking out at the audience. "My daughter has been gone for 19 years now. I will never stop missing her, but I take comfort in knowing that her story has helped others. That because of what happened to Emily, other families have found justice. That is her legacy." The applause that followed was long and heartfelt. Daniel Price remains in prison, serving his life sentence without the possibility of parole. He has never expressed remorse for killing Emily. In the few interviews he has given from prison, he has maintained that the DNA evidence was flawed, that he was wrongly convicted, but no credible expert has supported his claims. Linda and Robert do not think about him often. They refuse to give him space in their minds. He took enough from them. He will not take anything more. When asked if they hate him, Robert answered honestly, "I do not have room for hate," he said. "Hate requires energy, and I would rather spend that energy honoring Emily's memory. Daniel Price is where he belongs." "That is enough for me," Linda added. "I do not forgive him. I will never forgive him. But I also will not let him define the rest of my life. Emily was so much more than what he did to her, and I am so much more than the mother of a murdered child. I am also the mother of a young woman who made the world better just by being in it." The town of Sioux Falls has changed in the years since Emily's death. The coffee shop where she worked has closed, replaced by a chain store. The highway where her car was found has been widened and repaved. But the people who knew Emily have not forgotten her. Every August 24th, the anniversary of her disappearance, the local news runs a story about Emily. It has become a tradition, a way of keeping her memory alive in the community. And every year, people who never met Emily leave flowers at the memorial by the river. A high school teacher in Sioux Falls includes Emily's case in a unit on criminal justice. Students learn about the investigation, the mistakes that were made, the science that eventually solved it. They discuss what could have been done differently, what lessons can be learned. For many students, it is the first time they truly understand that crime is not just something that happens on television. It happens to real people in their own community. One former student wrote to Linda years later. She said that learning about Emily's case had inspired her to study forensic science. She wanted to help solve cold cases, to bring closure to families like the Turners. Linda keeps that letter in a drawer, and she reads it whenever she feels discouraged. It reminds her that Emily's story is still making a difference. In 2025, 20 years after Emily's death, the University of South Dakota held a special ceremony to honor the Emily Hartman Scholarship Fund. Over the past 5 years, the fund had supported 15 young women, helping them pursue degrees in sociology, social work, and criminal justice. Linda and Robert attended the ceremony. They sat in the audience and listened as each scholarship recipient spoke about what the fund had meant to them. One young woman said, "Emily Hartman's story taught me that even in the darkest circumstances, we can choose to create light. I am studying social work because I want to help people the way Emily wanted to help people. I want to honor her memory by living the life she did not get to live." Linda wept as she listened. This was what she had hoped for. That Emily's death would not be in vain. That something good could come from something so terrible. After the ceremony, Linda was invited to say a few words. She stood at the podium, looking out at the young faces in the audience, and felt Emily's presence so strongly it took her breath away. "My daughter would have been 40 years old this year," Linda said. "She would have graduated from college, maybe gone on to get a master's degree. She might have been married, might have had children. She might have been working for a non-profit, helping people who needed it most. That was her dream." Linda paused, collecting herself. But those things did not happen. Emily's life was stolen from her when she was just 20 years old. And for 20 years, my family has lived with that loss. She looked at the scholarship recipients. "But when I see young women like you, pursuing the dreams Emily had, making the world better the way she wanted to make it better, I feel hope. I feel like a part of Emily is still here, still making a difference, and that gives me comfort." Her voice broke, but she continued. "So I want to thank you. Thank you for carrying Emily's legacy forward. Thank you for proving that her life mattered, that her dreams mattered. Thank you for being the light in the darkness." When Linda sat down, there was not a dry eye in the room. The story of Emily Hartman is a story of loss and love, of persistence and justice. It is a story about a young woman whose life was cut short, and about the family who refused to let her be forgotten. It is also a story about the power of science, about how technology can bring truth to light even after years of darkness. Forensic genealogy was in its infancy when Emily died, but by the time her remains were found, it had become a powerful tool for solving cold cases. Without it, Daniel Price might never have been caught. But most of all, it is a story about hope. Hope that even when the trail goes cold, even when years pass without answers, justice is still possible. Hope that love is stronger than death, that memory is stronger than time. Linda and Robert Turner did not choose this path. They did not ask to become advocates for victims' families or symbols of perseverance. They simply refused to give up on their daughter. And in refusing to give up, they changed the world for other families walking the same painful road. Today, if you drive along Interstate 90 in Sioux Falls, past the spot where Emily's car was found, you will see nothing unusual. The highway looks the same as it did 20 years ago. But if you know the story, you cannot help but think of the young woman who disappeared there, and of the family who spent 16 years searching for her. And if you visit the Big Sioux River, you will find the memorial bench, weathered now by 2 decades of seasons. You might see flowers left by strangers, or candles lit in remembrance, and you might see an older couple sitting quietly on the bench, holding hands, looking out at the water. That is Linda and Robert Turner, and they are remembering their daughter. Emily Marie Turner was 20 years old when she died. She was a student, a barista, a volunteer, a friend. She was a daughter and a sister. She loved animals and dreamed of helping others. She answered her mother's phone calls and wore a silver necklace with the letter E. She was more than a victim. She was more than a case number. She was a human being with a life that mattered. And because her family never gave up, because they fought for 16 years to find the truth, Emily's story did not end in darkness. It ended in justice. It ended in memory. It ended in love. That is the legacy of Emily Hartman. Not the way she died, but the way she is remembered. Not the violence that took her life, but the love that kept her memory alive. And as long as her family tells her story, as long as young women benefit from the scholarship in her name, as long as flowers are left at the memorial by the river, Emily Hartman will never truly be gone. She will live on in the hearts of those who loved her, and in the legacy of justice she helped create. Rest in peace, Emily. You are home now, and you will never be forgotten.